Good evening, Western Standard viewers, and welcome to this week's edition of Hannaford. With me today is Yaroslav Baran. He's the co-founder of Pendulum Group, a crisis communications and political analysis firm in Ottawa. He's been doing Ottawa for 25 years, in government and out of it, helping people understand how Ottawa works. And when I first met Yaroslav Baran, he was providing high-level advice for Stephen Harper in the PMO. So we've got some important things to talk about this evening, and I think Mr. Baran is the man with some answers that matter. Yaroslav, it's good to see you again. Thanks for joining us.
Good to be here, Nigel. Thanks for the invitation.
Yaroslav, in the wake of that by-election in Toronto St. Paul's, that was one of the Liberals' safest seats. Yes. If they're in trouble there, they're in trouble everywhere. So there seem to be three big questions. Can Mr. Trudeau hang on as Prime Minister? The Liberal brand being as tarnished as it is there anybody in that party who could do any better at the next election if Mr. Trudeau were to leave the stage? And third, do you think we're going to have to wait until next year to find out? Do you think Justin Trudeau can hang on for another year?
Well, I think he can, but it's going to be a heck of a lot harder after that by-election. And I'll walk you through some of the reasons why that is. First of all, maybe we should take a step back. When Mr. Trudeau took over as party leader, the first thing that he did is he took out all of the capo regimes in his party, all of the independent points of authority and power. He excommunicated the Liberal senators. Then he went after the local captains. Captain Montreal, bang. Captain Toronto, bang. The chieftains who served as gatekeepers to the Italian community, the Greek community, fundraising, membership drives, all of that. He put those micro institutions out of their misery, out of existence, creating a party that had only one focus of loyalty, and that was to him. So that fact really strengthened his hand for a situation like now. And frankly, even the way he did candidate recruitment, he went after so-called star candidates, Olympians and star bankers and notable journalists and so on, people from outside the Liberal Party. So their allegiance isn't necessarily to the Liberal Party because they've been a lifelong member, it's to him. So at a time like this, when the going gets tough, he's in a stronger position than most party leaders would be in this kind of a situation. But, and there's a big but, in that there's a pivot that came around the St. Paul's by-election on June 24th. Before that by-election, Nigel, the general narrative, what you kept hearing from Liberals here in Ottawa was, yeah, well, you know what, the polls aren't great, and maybe we would do better with the new leader, but he brought us back from the wilderness. He's earned it. If he wants to run again, he'll get that shot. Now, when you look at what happened in St. Paul's in the by-election in Toronto, that was a safe Liberal seat, regardless of whatever spin. Every party always tries to spin these kinds of things, but it was, make no mistake, it was a safe Liberal seat, and they lost it. So now a whole bunch of Liberal MPs are saying, "Yikes! If we can lose St. Paul's, we can lose anywhere." So they are now in save the furniture mode, and every MP now wants to be part of the furniture. So they're making calculations. If he continues to lead the party, I could very well lose my seat. If we have a different leader, frankly, anybody, I should re-win my seat because it's supposed to be a safe Liberal seat. So that is that's a significant difference from before the by-election to after the by-election. There's going to be significant pressure on him to step down.
So this really was a tipping point.
It was. It should be. The question is, can he survive it? Can he navigate it? And it's going to take a lot of deft skill. And they're doing it. They're working on it. For example, there's been organic pressure from inside the Liberal caucus to have an immediate national caucus meeting to go over the entrails of this by-election, read the tea leaves, whatever interesting metaphor you want to use, and figure out what the heck happened. Where do we go from here? What are we going to do differently?
Other than moral suasion, though, Yaroslav,
Yeah.
does the Liberal Party actually have any mechanism by which it can remove him?
Not really. No, it doesn't. It doesn't. But if there were a full-on caucus revolt, we've seen this, for example, in the UK many times. Remember when Margaret Thatcher went into a caucus meeting as prime minister, came out as a backbencher? Yes. That can happen, regardless of the bylaws of any party's constitution. If your caucus revolts against you, you're toast, and they can just decide not to lead you anymore.
Well, now, you've been around there for more than 25 years, and you must remember that time when Stockwell Day was leading the Canadian Alliance, and there was a group of MPs who were members of the Alliance, but they had lost confidence in Mr. Day, and every week one more resigned. So you had this drip, and it dragged it out over the weeks. Would that work for the Liberal Party?
Well, it very well could in a situation like this. Back then, and I remember that very well. I was working in the opposition leader's office, press office at the time, so I was in the middle of all that drip. But it's a little bit different now for them because it's one thing to aspire to power, it's another thing to have power. And when you have power, you've got a lot of vested interests. You've got cabinet ministers who kind of like their job. You've got MPs in the governing caucus who, even if they're not in cabinet, they've been around a long time. If they win again, they figure, hey, maybe this is my shot. So there's a lot more, the stakes are higher for an incumbent party in a situation like this. So it's going to be really hard for them to hang on. Remember, Nigel, back in January, there was a backbench Liberal MP, Mr. McDonald from Newfoundland. He stuck his neck out and said, "We need a leadership review." Guys, anyone? And his head was almost chopped off by PMO. He stuck his neck out, figuring, we've been having all these private conversations. I know everybody in caucus agrees with me, but somebody's got to say it first. He said it, nobody else followed. They were all gun shy. Now, we're starting to see more and more people say it publicly, where we've got caucus members saying it, former cabinet ministers saying it. We've got PMO and damage control, cabinet ministers and damage control. So this is a live issue now.
So, Yaroslav, let's just say that backbench Liberal MPs, whether driven by fear or by a sense of this is wrong, something's got to be done, is there anybody in that caucus who could salvage their hopes at the next election? Certainly, right after the by-election, there was a poll that came out that said Mr. Carney, Ms. Freeland were likely to do even worse than Mr. Trudeau. So who's the white knight who can actually ride to the rescue here?
To be honest, it's hard to find one, and I don't say that out of partisanship or out of any personal disparagement of any of the front runners, the sort of the A-listers in the Liberal Party. But you've got to weigh them against the circumstances in which they would be taking over the party. Why have the polls changed so dramatically? Why is it the Conservatives are consistently about 20% ahead? Really, two issues. One is the cost of living, and dramatically higher than it was even 5 years ago. And second, a subset of the first, but an independent issue, is the cost of housing, either rent or buying a home. Neither of those can be fixed between now and the election. Now, the government is trying to fix one of them, cost of living, but they don't quite seem to get that changing it or fixing it with statistics isn't the same as fixing it. You can put out press releases, you can hold press conferences all you want saying, hey, look, inflation is back down to 2.9%, just under the upper end of the Bank of Canada target, band. That doesn't mean that single mom in a small town can afford to buy lunch meat again for her kids to put in.
Well, it certainly doesn't. I mean, you might have noticed we had Jack Mintz on last week, and he made the point that, yeah, sure, it's 2.9% this month, but that's compounded on the 2.9% and the higher numbers than that for every year. So your groceries are actually 20% more expensive today than they were 2 years ago. That's
absolutely. And look, even if Even if mortgage rates come down, almost everybody will have renewed in this period of higher rates. So they will still be paying $400 more a month, $500 more a month. So to tell them, hey, we fixed it, will come across as fundamentally insulting to the electorate. So there's no fix, because these are longer term fix problems driving these polls. And if you look at the individuals, Ms. Freeland or Mr. Carney, they, in that kind of a political climate, would probably easily be perceived as elites who can't relate to these cost of living problems because it doesn't affect them. Remember that little controversy when Minister Freeland said, "Oh, I don't even own a car. I take the subway everywhere." Well, try saying that to somebody who lives in, Weyburn, where there is no subway, or to somebody who lives in Fort Mac, where there is no subway. It just doesn't work. It just comes across as, Marie Antoinette, let them eat cake. And by the way, she also has a taxpayer paid driver and car. So maybe you don't own one, but the state is giving you a car. It just comes off as tone deaf. So having people who come off as elites, who are higher socioeconomic, background, who cavort with millionaires, is not going to be the fix.
Yaroslav, is probably just as well she has that driver, because when she drives herself, she picks up speeding tickets all over northern Alberta. So look, this is, but let's say, all right, there's not a shining white knight. We know that the Prime Minister has a very strong commitment to himself. And I don't know whether you were amused by this or quietly horrified, but the weekend display of, the old 2015 style campaigning when you're doing selfies and dancing for the camera and this kind of thing. Oh, my word. Is he so out of touch that he thinks that that's going to work again? And I'm going to ask you about that. But when you have dealt with that, what is, let's say he goes the distance. He can do one of two things. He can either project change, or he can double down on everything he ever dreamed of doing.
Yep.
As a sort of a vast legacy project, and incidentally, something to make it more difficult for whoever replaces him. So how about the dancing, and what are they going to do?
I think your characterization is spot on. Come September, the Prime Minister's office, the Prime Minister, the government, the cabinet, they're going to be at a fork in the road. They can choose one of two options. One of them is look at the polls, except, it's been like this for a year and a half. It's not going to change. We know what's driving it. We can't fix it. Accept that you're going to lose the next election and say, all right, let's go into legacy building mode. We've got 12 months to do everything we've ever wanted to do, but couldn't because we got distracted by governing. Let's just focus on what we're leaving behind, right? And if they do that, they'll go hard on climate change and Indigenous reconciliation, and then the core issues, the issue sets that have defined their brand, right? So that's option one. We're going to lose, so let's just go be as liberal as as progressive as we possibly can while we still have the reins. Option two is, heck, let's win it back. We're down by 20 points. Let's just give it our all. Let's convince voters to come back home. That would suggest, more retail politics, focusing on people, focusing on paychecks, focusing on disposable income and things like that. The problem is, if they choose the latter option, I'm not sure they know how. Because every single time we have seen a so-called reset under this government, they have, in fact, actually doubled down on those more ideological tenets that have defined this government's brand. Again, reconciliation, climate change policy, and so on. Every single time they've done reset, that's what they've done. Or they've shuffled the cabinet and put a bunch of younger and also less experienced faces in there that showcase superficial diversity, while there's been zero addition in terms of diversity of thought, diversity of perspective, to actually do something different, which is what a reset is supposed to be. So even though they'll be at this fork of the road, I'm not sure they know how to do one of those two things. And Go ahead.
Yaroslav, we've often said in this office here, the Western Standard, that Mr. Trudeau has a kind of messiah complex, that he is so deeply committed to the things that he believes in, whether they are scientifically based or not, that he feels that his significance rests in being faithful to the end. Now,
Yeah.
we could be wrong, but do you see an element of that in his behavior?
In fairness, to some degree, every party leader suffers from that. Um, Many party leaders, especially prime ministers, if you're actually at the helm of government, fall into this trap. Let me take a step back. When you first become prime minister, you don't know what you're doing because you've never been prime minister before. You may be competent, you may be smart, you may be accomplished, but you've never done this job before, so you're learning on the job. It's like building an aircraft while flying it. It's tough, and you make mistakes early on. You cut a lot of slack early on, but you grow into the role, and this is true for every prime minister. By the time you're 8 years in or 9 years in, you finally know what you're doing. You finally understand the machinery of government and the process and really how to govern just when the public is getting tired of you. And so most prime ministers fall into this trap of thinking, okay, I actually know this job now. I know what I'm doing. Yeah, we're down in the polls, but I'm better now I'm better than I was 8 years ago. I'm better than 9 years ago. And they look around and they think, okay, I've got some competent, Minister so-and-so is good. Yeah, she'd be a good leader. Minister so-and-so, yeah, he'd be good. But they think, but I'd still be better. I'm still better at this than they are. I'm better at politics than they are. I'm better at governing than they are. So I'm going to give it one more kick at the can, one more election, and then I'll pass over the reins. To be honest, our friend, our former colleague, Mr. Harper, unfortunately fell into this trap as well. He realized only too late that it had already been time for him to pass on the reins to somebody else. And many prime ministers fall into that trap. So that is true now with Mr. Trudeau. And another thing that's true is he wants to take on Pierre Poilievre. He's relishing the opportunity to be in the boxing match with him. He will lose, but he doesn't realize he'll lose. He thinks when he's in that ring one-on-one, everything is going to be reset to neutral. It'll be a level set, and he can take him on by portraying him as a minor Trump or something like that. He thinks he'll win against Poilievre, and I don't think he will.
Well, I don't know. I watched them in question period, and if I were Mr. Trudeau, I wouldn't be quite that confident.
Exactly.
That's well. So there it is. We have this prime minister, from everything that you've said, is likely to want to go the distance, and judging by the. It's maybe too early to tell, especially with the by-election only being 2 weeks behind us. But nevertheless, it does look rather as if he remains committed to his idealistic goals around climate change. And if the weekend's display of retail politics is anything to go by, he still thinks that selfies and socks are the way to the hearts of the Canadian people. So come to the big question. In your view, are we going to go all the way to the next election in October of 2025?
Almost certainly, yes. And
Okay.
there's several reasons for that. One of them is the polls. It would be basically a suicide mission for the Liberals, for the government, to call an early election, and only they can call an early election. So why would you drive your car off a cliff? And the polls suggest that would be the case.
You wouldn't do what Rishi Sunak is doing in Great Britain.
Yeah, kind of. And Emmanuel Macron in France as well. I mean,
Yes.
the polls, based on the polling, there's a zero case for the Liberals to want an election. So in a situation like this, they should want to hang on as long as they can, because the longer they hang on, the longer they can do stuff that they want to do rather than drive off a cliff. So that's number one. Secondly, if you look at the composition of seats in the House of Commons, the opposition cannot take down the government unless all of the opposition parties vote non-confidence all at the same time. Or in other words, if it's in every opposition party's interests all at the same time to want an early election, and that's simply not the case. For the Conservatives, yeah, bring it. The polls suggest a landslide majority. The Bloc Québécois, they could take it or leave it. The polls suggest they would do just as well as they did last time, probably a little bit better, probably pick up a few seats, but there's risk. The NDP, the polls suggest that they would come back worse off than they have than they are now. They won 25 seats in the last election, and we're seeing seat projections showing them maybe 18 seats, 19, maybe 20. So why would you incur a whole bunch of debt or pay, expend your war chest of $5 or $6 million just to lose seats? It doesn't make sense for the NDP. The asterisk I'm going to put on this is actually two asterisks. One of them is the NDP. At some point, they are going to have to start to differentiate themselves from the Liberals. Right now, they're the junior partner floating this government, and they know well the lessons from other jurisdictions in being the junior partner. For example, they know what happened to the Green Party in British Columbia in 2017. They were the junior partner in a similar arrangement with the NDP. 3 years later, the NDP actually won a majority and the Greens lost seats. So they were punished for being the junior partner.
Yeah.
Same thing in the United Kingdom. In 2015, the Liberal Democrats were the junior partner for 5 years, propping up the Tories, and they were wiped out afterwards. So the junior partner party normally gets punished. It's because it's hard to run against a government that you've been propping up for years. How do you do that brand differentiation? At one point, the NDP will have to try.
For a second, Yaroslav. Yeah. Where do those votes go? Because, I mean, if you're an NDP voter and you're fed up with the party because it supported another party that you don't like, so you don't want to vote for the NDP, but you don't want to vote for the Liberals.
Yeah.
What are you going to do? Stay home because you don't want to vote for the Conservatives either?
No, they're switching over to the Conservatives. That's what we're seeing. That is a phenomenon that we're seeing. And a lot of this isn't just default. Well, I don't like them. Who's left? A lot of it is very deft political positioning by the Conservatives, and we're seeing this at multiple levels of government as well. And I'll give you an example. The provincial government in Ontario, Conservative government, in the last election, Doug Ford, Premier of Ontario, was endorsed by every major private sector union in the province, whereas the public sector unions continued to endorse their traditional, NDP. They stuck to their NDP home. So that means that something is happening among working Canadians. The center of gravity is shifting. The dividing line used to be unionized or organized labor versus non-unionized labor. The new dividing line appears to be public sector unions versus private sector unions and ununionized. So the Conservatives on multiple levels of government have been eating in to traditional NDP turf, which is sticking up for the little guys, sticking up for workers, sticking up for ordinary Joe. And we hear a lot of that from Mr. Poilievre, as we've been hearing a lot of that generally in the Conservative movement, not only in Canada, but internationally.
Actually, that's one of the struggles for the Conservative movement, is that they're constantly presented by people like Ms. Freeland as the party of the wealthy, the party of big business and so on. And they're really not.
Not anymore.
They are the party of what was the phrase we used to use? The ordinary Canadian who works hard, plays by the rules, and pays his taxes.
That's right.
That's the upper line.
That's right.
That needs to be I'd be so bold to say, the Poilievre line.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, Nigel, the only other thing I'd mention is there's one Hail Mary pass that might still be left in the Trudeau government's arsenal, and that would be, depending on what happens in November south of the border, there'd be a possibility that should there be a Trump victory south of the border, I can foresee a political maneuver whereby Prime Minister Trudeau calls a press conference the next morning or the following week and says, you know what, folks, they just elected their Trump. Now you decide if you want your own. And don't get me wrong, I'm not at all saying that Mr. Poilievre is similar to Donald Trump. He is not. I've known him for 25 years. He's a man of integrity. He's a man of principle. But This will be the branding or the counter branding play that the Liberals will use, because that's all they've got. So they will try to portray him as a Trump. So there is a foreseeable tactic whereby the Liberals say right after the U.S. election, knowing that most Canadians are not fans of Mr. Trump, saying, now you decide if you want your own. It would be very much a Hail Mary, throw the football, close your eyes, cross your fingers, and it almost certainly wouldn't work, but it could arguably be their best play.
That's a really interesting point. And another thing you said in that was the consistency of Mr. Poilievre. It's not commonly known, but when he was a student at the University of Calgary, he contributed a number of columns to the Calgary Herald, where I was working at the time. And, if you look at what he says in those columns, he says essentially the same thing today. It's the same point of view. It just doesn't take quite so much editing. But you see what I mean? He's been like Harper in this respect. There is a principle that animates these conservative leaders, and they're faithful to it through the years, unlike so many other parties and politicians who will be whatever you want them to be on the day that you're talking to them.
That's right. It's all on the public record.
Got one last question for you, if I may, and that's having frankly, a fairly realistic opinion of what motivates and drives a member of Parliament. I have to ask you about the pension. Now, we had a fixed election date. It was to be October the 21st, but that chopped off the pension eligibility for about 80 members of Parliament of all parties. And then the excuse was used that, October the 21st clashes with a religious holiday, so let's make it a week later. And everybody voted and said, my word, my pension is safe. So, do you think that there might just be a little bit of that in driving people to make this government last as long as it can, right up to the very end?
Mm-hmm. Well, you know what? That may come into play, particularly with some of the opposition parties. And here's why that matters. First of all, you're right. Moving the election by 1 week made the difference in pension eligibility for a whole bunch of MPs who were elected 6 years ago or 5.5 years ago, or whatever it is right now. Now, the reason it will matter for some and not for others is this. If Mr. Trudeau decides to call an early election, there's nothing the backbenchers can do about it. Ordinary MPs can't say, oh, wait, no, we will stop you because of our pensions. MPs have no say. It's always the constitutional prerogative, as you know, of every prime minister to go to the governor general and say, we're having an election, please. And the governor general obliges. So if he chooses to call one, nobody can stop it. If there is a push to bring down the government, and that would happen organically from the opposition parties, those opposition MPs who fear losing their seats will get skittish. They will want to wait until they're eligible for a pension. And additionally, among the Liberal backbench, even though they can't do anything to stop it, there would certainly be pressure from within the Liberal caucus not to go early, even if that is the smartest tactical move, say, for example, this November. So they'll think, okay, you're gambling, it's your best move, but it's probably still a failing move. So please don't do that. Let's go the full distance.
Okay. Well, I can see why you're doing the job you're doing, Yaroslav. You always did it splendidly when I was there with you in Ottawa, and this is the kind of talk that we need to hear more of. And I would like to invite you back a little later.
Oh, I love it. It was a real pleasure.
The options for the Conservative Party, now that we've exhausted the ones for the Liberal Party. Ladies and gentlemen, Yaroslav Baran, co-founder of the Pendulum Group, a crisis communication, I guess it's management too.
Same thing.
In political analysis, you've just had a great analysis of what we're looking at right now. Thanks, Yaroslav.
My pleasure, Nigel. Good to see you again.
For the Western Standard, I'm Nigel Hannaford.